Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. The betrayal of a loved one always catches us by surprise because that is why we consider people to be close when we fully trust them and do not expect a stab in the back. However, criminologists know that when it comes to a brutal murder, the perpetrator should be sought first of all among people from the victim's immediate environment. But what if it was not possible to complete the plan? The victim cannot yet testify because of his serious condition, and the perpetrator is frantically thinking about how to cover his tracks without arousing suspicion. It reminds the plot of some thriller, but alas, this story happened a few years ago in real life. The case of a pregnant Chinese woman named Wang then became one of the most high-profile incidents in Thailand. The perpetrator attempted to get rid of his wife in one of the national parks, framing the whole thing as a tragic accident, but it seems that nature itself intervened to save the young woman and her child from being killed. When the truth was revealed, it literally shocked the detectives who investigated the case, as well as the doctors who saved the victim's life, because they were all sure that the husband with all his heart is worried about his wife and baby. But even greater shock caused the motive for such a heinous and cruel act. It should be added that this case is not unique, and in the same Thailand, about the same period, there was a similar story with another couple from China, but the man, unfortunately, managed to bring the plan to an end. But let's talk about everything in order. Wang Nan's story. Wang Nan was born in Nanjing, a major metropolis and former capital of China, in 1987. She grew up in a fairly well-to-do family, and her parents strived to give their daughter the best education and in every way to promote the development of her talents and potential. The girl studied well in school, and especially easy she was given to the exact sciences. After graduating from school, Wang Nin entered a prestigious university where she studied the basics of business and finance, and at the same time on courses mastered several foreign languages. After receiving a diploma, the girl got a job in a large travel agency where she was able to establish herself as a valuable, responsible, and very motivated employee. She quickly rose up the career ladder, and soon she was sent to Thailand so that she headed a new branch there and engaged in its development. Nan worked as a top manager for a few years, but then decided to leave the travel agency to start her own business. She opened a restaurant of Chinese national cuisine and managed it so successfully that soon her brainchild grew into a small but popular chain in Bangkok. Meeting Yu Xiaodong. Wang was a successful young entrepreneur, competently led and developed the business. However, for the sake of career, she completely sacrificed her personal life. As the young woman later recalled, her last romantic relationship took place in her student days, but with the beginning of labor activity, she simply had no time to go on dates because of the total employment. Wang Nan was not too worried about her loneliness, even though she was already almost 30 years old. She was constantly in business, always rushing somewhere and working tirelessly. Even though she had lived in Thailand for a long time and had learned the language well, she decided to improve her skills and took additional courses to learn Thai. At the training center, Wang happened to meet a young man named Yu who stared at her for a few minutes and then approached her in his native language. They exchanged a few words, and the guy asked her why Nan was studying the language, to which she replied that it was necessary for her business development. Yu then suggested that they exchange business cards so that they could meet and socialize sometime. Nan was not eager to continue chatting, but still, out of politeness, she handed him her business card and he gave her his in return. The business card said that Xiaodong was in the export-import business in Bangkok. Wang wasn't impressed and simply tossed the business card into her purse, safely forgetting about it. Only Yu seemed to be seriously interested in the young woman and called her the very next day. However, she was busy with work and could not give the conversation even a couple of minutes and refused the offer to meet and have coffee. A few days later, the situation repeated itself, and Nan again refused to go on a date, citing her busyness and preparations for an upcoming business conference. There she planned to expand her business ties and make new partners. Then Yu showed up at the event with a luxurious bouquet of flowers, and after waiting for Nan to get free, he approached her and asked her out again. Wang Nan was bribed by such persistence because no one had previously tried to get her attention so desperately, so she agreed to meet him and have dinner. An unexpected romance. It seemed that you didn't just fall in love with Nan. He literally lost his head. He constantly gave her signs of attention, made pleasant surprises and gifts, sent flowers to her doorstep every morning with little romantic notes inside, and called at least twice a day to say good morning and good night. Wang's feelings were twofold. On the one hand, she was annoyed by the guy's obsession, but on the other hand, she was flattered that someone was trying to win her love. So, without expecting it, for the first time in a long time, the young woman plunged into a romantic relationship. Her boyfriend did not just woo her beautifully, but tried to be perfect in everything. He shared her interests and views in many matters, learned to cook Wang's favorite dishes, sought to diversify their leisure time by getting tickets to various events, and was also ready to help her at work and at home at the first request. Wang Nan could not believe her happiness. It seemed to her that this only happens in the movies, but it was really happening to her. Except he was too much of a rush. They had only been dating for a few months, and he was already planning a wedding and coming up with names for their future children. Wang was a little embarrassed by this kind of talk, but at times like this you started talking about how they were both in their 30s, and at that age it was time to plan a family. A wedding without rings and veils. Nan didn't know how to behave or how to react to her suitor's behavior. She realized that he was right about his age, but she still doubted whether he was the right person to marry. One day, after another heart-to-heart talk, when Nan honestly confessed her doubts, he promised that he would prove his love to her. That same night, after they went home, the man in love sent his girlfriend a long, touching letter full of tenderness. He confessed his love to her, promised to be the best husband in the world and the best father to their children. In the morning, Wang found the suitor on the doorstep of her house with a bouquet of flowers. Xiaodong declared that he had never been so serious in his intentions and was ready to take her as his wife right now. Nan guffawed, saying that the courthouse wouldn't open until an hour and a half later, to which you offered to go there right now, and if the door was open, they would register the marriage immediately. Wang agreed to this venture, confident that the government office would be closed. But to her surprise, the door was opened, and the authorized officer registering unions was already at his desk. As it later turned out, you had arranged everything in advance, asking to make an exception for him and his bride and formalize their marriage early in the morning. It was a very strange wedding. No guests, no rings, no dress or veil, and no memorable photos. Wang Nan could not get rid of the thought that all this is not real, because she did not even introduce the chosen one to his mother, with whom they have always been very close, and when she came to her senses, in her hands was already a marriage certificate. Next to her stood a satisfied, smiling, newly married husband. A tragic accident? In June 2019, when Wang was 3 months pregnant, her husband persuaded her to arrange a vacation and go on a small trip, reasoning that after the birth of the baby, they would not be able to get out anywhere for a long time. Nan reluctantly agreed, and they chose the Thai National Park Reserve, Pha Thame, famous for its picturesque forests and unique rock paintings, the age of which is estimated at tens of thousands of years. However, on the morning of June 9th, tragedy struck. When the couple were on one of the observation decks where they were admiring the sunrise, Wang Nan suddenly fell down from a height of 111 feet. When rescuers arrived at the scene, a crying youth ran up to them and begged for medics to save his wife and the baby she was carrying. The man said they were enjoying the first rays of the rising sun when suddenly his wife felt sick. She took a step to the side, but she became dizzy and snapped downward before he could pick her up. The young woman had fallen from the height of the 10th floor. She had several open fractures, and the situation seemed hopeless. But suddenly, Nan groaned and opened her eyes. Her husband immediately stopped crying and wailing, and a look of horror appeared on his face. However, he quickly pulled himself together, loudly thanked the Almighty that his beloved was alive, and then leaned to her ear and whispered something in Chinese. Unstable family life before dealing with the events of that tragic day. Let's go back 6 months and find out how the couple's family life was. And to begin with, Wang regretted her marriage almost immediately as soon as it was registered. But at first she was hoping that you would be a good husband, a reliable support, and a man to rely on. Alas, her hopes were not realized, and soon the new husband showed his true colors. He spent almost all his time at home playing computer games, willingly spent his wife's money, while he did not contribute anything to the family budget. When his wife asked him why he didn't go to work, Xiaodong replied that his business was in a seasonal lull, and he could rest for the time being. However, this lull had become too long, so the young woman decided to inquire about her husband's work. That's when she found out that his successful export-import business existed only on paper and printed business cards. At that moment, Wang realized the full scale of the mistake she had made because she had not even thought about drawing up a prenuptial agreement. So now her husband can freely spend what she earns and, in case of divorce, will claim her property. The couple had a serious conversation, during which Yu cried like a child and assured that he had temporary difficulties, but he will definitely improve and find a good job. However, it soon became clear that he was not going to look for anything and felt quite comfortable sitting on his wife's neck. A grown man, and indeed behaved like a child. Almost all the time he played computer games, and if he did something around the house or helped his wife in the restaurant, then be sure to ask her for money for his own needs. At some point, Wang got tired of it, and she said that she would no longer give him a penny until he found a job, stealing from his own wife and an unwanted child. A day after that conversation, Yu disappeared, and with him Nan's marriage certificate and identity card went missing, but she only noticed the missing documents in the evening when she received a call from her accountant inquiring about the transfer of a large sum of money from her account. The young woman was shocked because she had not transferred any money, but she immediately guessed who had done it. The amount involved was more than $500,000, which the husband had transferred to his personal account, providing the bank with his marriage certificate, his wife's documents, and assurances that it was their joint money, which they managed together. Wang did not hesitate to go to the police to report the theft, and the fugitive husband was tracked down a few hours later when he tried to cash out some of the stolen funds. At the station, Yu sobbed again and on his knees begged his wife's forgiveness. He admitted that he had lost a large sum of money gambling, and now he was threatened with death, demanding to repay the debt. In addition, it turned out that this was not the first time he had been on the radar of the police, and earlier, back in his native China, he had served 8 years for robbery. Nan almost burned with shame when she listened to all this, because, as it turned out, she did not know the man she married. However, the young woman felt that gambling, it is a disease, and she must help her husband to get rid of this addiction and return to normal life. Wang not only agreed to pay off half of her husband's debt, but also made him the manager of one of her restaurants. At first, Yu seemed to accept it gratefully and took the new position responsibly. He even developed a good strategy for the development of the establishment, but his enthusiasm was not enough for long. Soon he began to spend more time playing computer games and entertainment again. During that period, Wang discovered that she was pregnant, which she informed her husband, but he reacted strangely and even aggressively. Yu said that he was not yet ready for this and persuaded his wife to have an abortion, which she categorically refused. Then the husband threatened divorce and said that he intends to seek through the court to divide the property. He did not speak to his wife for several days, but then suddenly softened and apologized. Yu admitted that he said nonsense on emotion and, in fact, happy about the upcoming addition, began to again show care, cook, and help around the house. Fateful trip. 2 months Wang was absolutely happy, because her marriage became almost perfect, as promised by the lover at the beginning of their relationship. He was attentive, caring, responsibly fulfilled his job as manager, and actively prepared their home for the arrival of a child. One day Xiaodong offered his wife to ensure her life and health, because she was pregnant, and such a step would help to protect her and the baby in case of various unforeseen situations. The young woman readily agreed, and even wondered how she had not thought of it before. The insurance was taken out the very next day, and a couple of weeks later Yu talked about taking a vacation to relax and unwind. Nan was hesitant, but her husband insisted, saying that they didn't have a honeymoon, and with a baby they wouldn't be able to travel in the coming years. He also said that they had been through a difficult period and needed to reset to get rid of all the negativity and heavy thoughts. In the end, his arguments proved convincing and Nan agreed. His husband chose the place himself, booked the hotel, mapped out the activities and planned the itineraries so that the trip would be exciting and educational, but not too tiring for the pregnant woman. Nan entrusted the matter entirely to her husband, and was happy to see how enthusiastically he was thinking about their vacation. On June 7th, the couple arrived at the park for the first time and spent most of the day there. They walked a lot and visited a lot of beautiful sights and lookouts. On that summer Friday evening, the park had a huge number of visitors who were literally everywhere. Toward evening, Wong noticed that her husband was getting angry and very nervous. When she asked if everything was all right, he replied that because of the crowds of tourists, they couldn't have privacy and enjoy the sunset in silence. Wong then even relented, deciding that it would be very romantic. As the sun set, the park became less crowded, and you climbed the fence of the observation deck and started calling his wife to the edge, telling her what an incredible view there was. But the pregnant woman refused to go there, citing that it was already dark, and it could be dangerous. The husband got angry, but returned to her after a few minutes, saying that they would have to come to the park to meet the sunrise there. Since the couple returned to the hotel well past midnight, they decided to rest and sleep in on Saturday and head back to the reserve early Sunday morning. What happened on June 9th? Early Sunday morning, as planned, the couple went to the national park to admire the first rays of the rising sun. They woke up around 3 a.m. and left when it was still dark outside. There were hardly any visitors at that time, and Van thought for a moment that they were all alone there. The couple met the dawn on one of the observation decks, and afterwards, he went down to the cliff and began to persuade his wife to come up to him to admire the rock paintings. Nan hesitated, but her husband assured her that it was safe, and he would help her down and then climb up. The young woman trusted her spouse and cautiously approached it. The view from up there was indeed mesmerizing. He hugged his wife and suddenly asked her if she regretted anything in this life. Nan was surprised at such a question, but confidently replied that she didn't regret anything. Then he ran his hand through her hair, kissed his spouse on the cheek, and then leaned over to her ear and said, "Die." At that moment, he loosened his embrace and pushed his wife down the cliff. A miraculous rescue. He looked around once more to make sure no one had seen them. He then looked down intently, but didn't see where exactly his wife had fallen. He listened. It was quiet, no one screaming or calling for help, which meant there were no witnesses downstairs either. Yu then leisurely headed towards the park exit to bide his time and report the incident when Wong would surely be dead. However, down below, a few hikers who had turned off the trail noticed the body lying on the rocks and immediately called the rescuers, reporting the incident. Yu Xiaodong had already left the whizzed past him. He immediately realized what the matter was and went back, proceeding to the place where his wife had fallen. There he put on quite a show, with tears, screams, and pleas for help. At that moment, he was sure that his wife was already dead, so no one would know the truth. But as it turned out, during the fall, Nan caught on the branches of trees, which reduced the speed, and landed first on the bushes and then rolled on the rocks. All this cushioned the impact and saved the life of Wong and her child, but did not save her from serious injuries. While he was crying and lamenting that he did not want to live without his beloved wife and child, she suddenly opened her eyes and tried to say something, but could not. At that moment, everyone noticed the genuine horror on her husband's face, but he quickly pulled himself together, leaned over to his wife, and hissed in her ear in Chinese that she should keep silent if she wanted to live. Attempts to finish the job. The victim was diagnosed with head trauma, multiple closed and open fractures, lacerations, soft tissue contusions, ruptured internal organs, and massive blood loss. In addition, her spine was severely damaged, and doctors feared that even if she survived, she would never be able to walk again. Wong spent several days in a coma, hooked up to life support machines. During this time, her husband literally never left her side, spending days and nights in her room. Doctors applauded such devotion and love, but in fact, every time he was alone with his wife, he thought about how to finish her without arousing suspicion. He scrutinized the apparatuses, but he still couldn't figure out how to disable them discreetly. The terrible truth and the loss of a child. When Wong came to her senses, her husband was scared out of his wits. He did not leave her alone, not for a moment, fearing that at any moment she would talk and tell the police the truth about what had happened. Once alone, he threatened her again, saying that he had nothing left to lose. During the first interrogation, the victim confirmed her husband's words, saying that her fall was the result of dizziness. But a few hours later, when her husband left for a moment, Nan asked the nurse to call the police again and not to let her husband into the room. That's when she told the gruesome story of her fall, claiming that her husband had tried to kill her. He burst into the room, shouting that his wife was insane from the blow to her head, and that he would never harm her and the baby. But the man's words sounded extremely unconvincing, and he was taken into custody the same day at the hospital. He was charged with several charges at once, attempted murder as well as intimidation in case the victim spoke. When her husband was arrested and sent to jail to await trial, Wong breathed a sigh of relief. She still had a long period of rehabilitation ahead of her, but now she felt safe. At first, she had hoped that the pregnancy could be saved because the baby had survived the fall from the heights. However, because of the strong painkillers, several surgeries under general anesthesia, and the need to inject antibiotics, the doctors insisted on abortion because the priority was the life of the mother, and the fetus, in all likelihood, would still die from so many drugs. It was a huge shock for Nan, but she followed the doctor's recommendations. Trial and sentencing, Xiaodong categorically denied his guilt and kept insisting on the accident version. In prison, he behaved calmly, hired good lawyers, and was confident that he would escape punishment or that it would not be too severe. Investigators and the prosecutor in charge of the case had no doubt that the defendant had committed the crime out of self-interest and hoped to receive a large insurance payout, as well as inherit his wife's fortune, which at the time amounted to almost $2.5 million. However, at one of the interrogations, Yu literally shocked everyone by talking about another motive for his inhumane act. It turns out that he resented his wife when she agreed to repay only half of his debt, formed because of a passion for gambling. In the man's opinion, if his wife really loved him, she would have closed all his debts because she had the money. Xiaodong then decided that Wang did not love him, and he had the right to punish her for it. After these words, the defendant fell silent, and realizing that he had said too much, said that he had been misunderstood. But his unexpected confession, as well as Nan's testimony, was enough to send him to prison for a long time. In March 2021, the defendant was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, but Xiaodong and his lawyers filed several appeals, and 6 months later, the Thai court showed wonders of leniency, reducing the life sentence to just 10 years in prison. Wang and her loved ones were shocked by the decision, saying that such a lenient sentence would set a bad precedent that could encourage others to commit similarly horrific acts. Also in Thailand, around the same time, a similar case occurred on Phuket Island, where a Chinese national drowned his wife, claiming it was a swimming accident on the beach. He also did it for the sake of insurance. Since the fact of the murder was proved, the man was sentenced to death. Xiaodong, on the other hand, was sentenced to only 10 years for the failed murder attempt, and in fact, the murder of the fetus. How did Wang Nan's fate turn out? To date, the final verdict in Wang Nan's case has not yet been issued. Yu is serving her 10-year sentence, and the injured woman is trying to challenge the court's decision. In parallel, Yu is also filing appeals in an attempt to prove her innocence and be released. For Xiaodong stood up for his numerous relatives, who claimed that he was a rich businessman and it was Wang married to him for selfish motives. However, there is no way to prove it, as the man has nothing but huge debts. As for Nan, contrary to doctors' predictions, after a series of complicated surgeries and long rehabilitation, the young woman was able to get back on her feet. She relearned to walk, and most of the money she earned was spent on her recovery. In 2023, Nan took up work again and was able to revitalize her once successful business. She has also created and led an organization dedicated to helping women who are victims of domestic violence. She also runs her own blog, trying to warn women against the mistakes she made herself. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. In February 2018, the quiet town of Deltona, located in eastern Florida off the Atlantic coast, was rocked by news of the brutal murder of a young man named Patrick de la Cerda. The 25-year-old man was found dead in his home, and the nature of his injuries suggested that the perpetrator had a personal grudge against him. The Patrick de la Cerda case is an example of an almost perfect, elaborate, and planned crime that may well have gone unsolved. Although the murderer was named almost immediately, no direct evidence was found to prove his guilt. As later claimed investigator Chad Weaver, who investigated the case, he realized from the beginning that it would be a real detective, worthy of screen adaptation. In fact, so it happened. Who is Patrick de la Cerda? Patrick de la Cerda was born in June 1992 in one of the most picturesque metropolitan areas, Miami, in the state of Florida. His father, Max de la Cerda, was a native of Spain, and his mother, Patricia Ronza, was born and raised in France, but in the 80s moved to the United States, where he soon married and gave birth to a son. De la Cerda family was very friendly and happy. Patrick grew up in an atmosphere of love, care, and mutual respect. He was a very kind, intelligent, and sociable guy, studied well in school, could easily become the soul of any company and chalk a lot of friends, and also the boy from childhood years was very close to his parents, who did not spare no effort and money to ensure that the son received a good education and grew up a worthy man. The head of the family worked all his life in the construction field and was an excellent specialist in his field. The family was not rich, but was considered quite well-to-do by the standards of the big city. After graduating from high school, Patrick decided to enter the construction faculty to continue his father's work. When the young man was studying at university, his parents, after almost a quarter of a century of living together, decided to divorce. It should be noted that they parted very quietly and peacefully, without scandals, division of property, and the like. The mother moved to the quiet town of Deltona, located in the east of the state, where she soon remarried. The adult son decided to stay with his father in Miami, where they worked together and were respected and sought after professionals in the construction industry. Despite the divorce of the parents, all family members remained very close and were friendly with each other. They were always in touch with each other, calling and communicating regularly, and were always ready to help when needed. Patrick regularly visited his mother in Deltona, told her about everything that was happening in his life, shared his joys and experiences, meeting the girl of his dreams. Thanks to his French-Spanish roots, the young man from an early age had a bright appearance and enjoyed great success with the fair sex. But for him has always been an example of the family in which he grew up. So Patrick did not seek frivolous and fleeting affairs. He dreamed of a bright mutual feeling and a strong family of his own. With the girl of his dreams, de la Cerda met by chance on the internet, on one of the popular sites where lonely hearts are looking for each other. He registered there and created an account on the advice of a friend, but he himself did not fully believe that it was really possible to meet his soulmate there. One June evening in 2017, without much enthusiasm, he was flipping through the profiles of girls on the site, as suddenly his attention was attracted by a photo which depicted a searing brunette with a rather unusual bright appearance. She had big, just bottomless eyes and a charming smile. Patrick was literally enchanted and decided to write to the beautiful stranger. She responded to his message and a relaxed communication started between them. The girl's name was Jessica Devnani. She was born in 1988 in the city of Orlando, located in the central part of the state of Florida. After graduating from high school, she entered one of the local universities where she studied banking, and after graduating, she got a job at a bank branch in her native Orlando. Jessica was also immediately attracted to the handsome young man. For a few days they corresponded actively on the website and then decided to exchange phone numbers. For the next couple of weeks they called each other every evening and talked for hours about everything. The couple quickly developed mutual sympathy and trust, so the young people decided to meet in real life. But since they lived in different parts of the state, they chose a place about halfway to each other for the meeting. Already on the first date, Patrick realized that Jessica was the girl he had been looking for so long, and whom he now does not want to let go. She also liked him immediately, and Jessica was a little confused by the age difference, because she was 4 years older than Patrick. On the way home, Patrick called his mother and told her that he had met the girl of his dreams whom he wanted to marry and start a family. Patricia heard the joy and excitement in her son's voice, realized that he was serious and was happy for him. This long-distance relationship lasted several months, and it was a big problem because the couple could only see each other on weekends, somewhere neutral. Usually they rented a hotel room in some cozy secluded place and just enjoyed each other's company. But on Sunday night, everyone flew back to their homes because they had to go to work on Monday morning. Marriage proposal in December 2017, Patrick moved to Delton, where his mother lived, to be closer to his sweetheart. He bought a house there in a quiet neighborhood and began to carry out some repair work, preparing a cozy nest for the move of his chosen one. But Jessica could not yet so immediately leave work, and they planned a housewarming party for early spring next year. On the eve of the new year, which the couple met together, the young man decided to make his girlfriend a surprise. He arranged fireworks in the backyard of the house, and while Jessica admired the fireworks, got down on one knee and held out a box with a ring, asking her the most important question: will she become his lawful wife? Jessica was unspeakably happy and of course answered him in agreement. Patrick admitted that he had been looking for a ring suitable for the engagement for a long time, but he had not found the perfect one in any of the jewelry stores. All of them seemed to him not beautiful and refined enough for such an occasion. He chose the best of what was available to be able to make a proposal before the new year, but ordered another one in the jewelry workshop, an exclusive ring, the design of which the young man came up with himself. Something had happened to Patrick. 2 months have passed since the engagement. Preparations for the wedding and the upcoming housewarming were in full swing. The couple's choice was approved by their parents, and they themselves were unspeakably happy, preparing for a new stage of their lives. The young people planned to arrange a lavish celebration in Miami, on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean, or in France, where the groom's mother was from. On February 27, 2018, Max de la Cherda, Patrick's father, received a call from a courier. The father's number was listed as an additional contact. The courier reported that his son's order was delivered to the specified address, but the customer does not open the phone. This was very unlike Patrick, so the father immediately got worried, but since he was at work at that moment, and could not go to pick up the order, and at the same time to check if everything was all right with his son, Max decided to ask his future daughter-in-law. He called Jessica, and with anxiety in his voice, said that he couldn't reach his son. Jessica herself had been trying to contact her fiancé since morning, but he didn't answer messages and calls. When she mentioned this to Patrick's father, Max pronounced, "Something must have happened to Patrick." Jessica immediately dropped everything she was doing and headed to the groom's house as fast as she could. When she pulled up, she immediately saw Patrick's car in the driveway, which indicated that he hadn't gone anywhere. Since she had her own key, Jessica entered the yard and called out loudly to her lover several times, but there was no response. Jessica carefully opened the front door and saw a horrifying picture. Her fiancé was lying practically at the entrance, in a pool of his own blood. He showed no signs of life. Jessica immediately rushed to call the emergency services, but the paramedics who arrived on the scene were unable to help Patrick and only declared him dead. By the time the police arrived, a distraught Jessica was sobbing in the backyard of the house, where Patrick had proposed 2 months earlier. When one of the officers approached her, she only looked at him and told him she knew who had massacred her lover and ruined her entire life. A rich and powerful ex-boyfriend. To understand this difficult case, and to understand who could want to kill a young guy who, at first glance, had neither enemies nor ill-wishers, you need to go back a little bit, at the time when he and Jessica just met. The thing is that, at that time, the girl was in a relationship with a certain Gregory Bender, a wealthy businessman who owned his own investment fund. Jessica met Gregory in her student years. He was 20 years older than her, and he literally turned the young beauty's head. The businessman wooed her beautifully, gave her expensive gifts, and took her to fancy resorts. Jessica thought she had found her one and only love, but soon she began to notice some oddities in his behavior. Gregory sought to control his girlfriend in everything, closely watched where she goes and with whom she communicates. If Jessica had an admirer, he immediately got rid of him through threats and intimidation. At the same time, he told her almost nothing about himself. This relationship lasted almost 8 years, and during this time, Gregory never introduced his chosen one to his family or friends. They met, spent time together, or went on vacation only when he wanted it, and Gregory rarely invited his girlfriend to his house. He himself argued that he was very busy. Naturally, Jessica wanted to have a normal family, to have children, But Bender said every time that it was not yet time for that, and when she tried to break off the relationship, Gregory gave her a ring and asked her to marry him. Jessica accepted, but nothing had changed. They still lived apart and saw each other only when the groom said so. One day, Gregory was in a car accident and ended up in a hospital bed. When Jessica heard about it, she rushed to him. But beforehand, she decided to stop by his house to get some things for Gregory. There, Jessica ran into a woman she had never seen before and asked who she was. The stranger, instead of answering, asked her a similar question. Jessica showed the ring on her finger and said that she was the bride of the owner of the house. The woman then laughed and showed her ring, stating that she was Bender's legal wife, Demora Sanchez Bender. After such a shocking revelation, Jessica decided to immediately part ways with the businessman who had cheated her for so many years. However, the boyfriend began to literally pursue Jessica, begging her to return, promising that he would divorce Demora. In the end, nothing in their relationship did not change. Finally tired of this affair, Jessica filled out a questionnaire on a dating site, where she soon met Patrick. After starting to communicate with him, she firmly decided to break up with Gregory, about which she informed him, but he did not want to let her go. Obsessive stalker at first, Bender simply persuaded Jessica to come back to him and try to start over, once again promising to divorce his wife. Then he moved on to threats and harassment, and when he realized that all this is useless, decided to search for a rival, about which at that time exactly knew nothing. He had to turn to professionals to hack into Jessica's account and find out who she was communicating with. After finding out who Patrick was and obtaining his contacts, Gregory began sending him threatening messages and demanding that he break up with Jessica, calling her his fiancée. Patrick did not react to the threats and was absolutely calm, believing that the matter would not go further than threats. But Jessica was scared, because she realized that her ex-boyfriend could expect anything from her. He was a man with a lot of money and connections, and he had a huge collection of firearms that he could use. Jessica offered Patrick to break up before anyone got hurt, but he wouldn't even hear of it. Then they decided to go to the police, providing evidence that Bender was stalking and threatening them. The couple managed to get a restraining order for Gregory to approach them and try to make contact by any means. Gregory was also required to surrender all firearms stored in his home. Things calmed down for a while, and the lovers began to think that the stalker had left them alone. However, Jessica convinced Patrick that it was necessary to install CCTV cameras around and inside the house, because she feared that Gregory might violate the ban. A crime scene inspection and the first theory. But let's go back to the tragic events of February 27, 2018. During the initial examination of the crime scene, criminalists immediately ruled out the version of robbery, and noted that, judging by the nature of the mutilation, this murder had a personal motive, and the perpetrator literally hated his victim. On the body of a 25-year-old guy counted 4 gunshot wounds, in the thigh, in the chest, and 2 in the head. In addition, the experts found injuries and bruises characteristic of a fall from a ladder. The body itself was lying on the floor between the front door and the stairs leading to the second floor. Investigators speculated that the killer had most likely snuck into the house and was waiting for the owner on the second floor. When an unsuspecting Patrick went inside and climbed the stairs, the intruder stepped out to meet him and fired the first bullet into his thigh. The wounded young man rolled down the stairs, and the perpetrator followed him down, fired another bullet into his chest, and then finished the victim off with 2 follow-up shots to the head. The murder weapon was not found, but it was a rather rare model of pistol, which was not easy to obtain. The first shell casing was found on the second floor of the house. 2 more similar shell casings were found downstairs, but the 4th shell casing was not there, so it was assumed that the perpetrator took it away with him, perhaps as a trophy. Despite Jessica's words that she knows who killed her fiancé, the first under suspicion was the neighbor of the murdered man, with whom they had a serious conflict a couple of months ago. The man was a combat participant and a veteran of the U.S. Army, was wounded and severely concussed in the war, against which he developed a mental disorder. He was excellent with firearms and could easily get a rare model of gun. In December 2017, the veteran mistook his new neighbor for a burglar and opened fire. Luckily, no one was hurt at the time, but the neighbor was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital due to an exacerbation of his disorder. After he returned home, he constantly followed Patrick, called him a spy, and promised to bring him out in the open. The mentally ill neighbor could indeed have a motive created by his unhealthy imagination, so the man was detained and decided to interrogate. He made no secret of his intense dislike for Patrick, but at the time of the murder itself, he had a 100% alibi, which was confirmed by several people. Searching for evidence and trying to provoke the version of the robbery from the very beginning cancelled, because in the house everything was in its place, and the money and valuables remained untouched. Only hard disks with recordings made by video surveillance cameras were missing, so it was impossible to trace who entered and left the house that day. In addition, no evidence at all was found at the crime scene. Forensic experts could not find a single fingerprint, shoe print, or DNA trace. The murder was carefully thought out and planned, and although the investigation had little doubt that Gregory was behind it all, it seemed at the time that he could get away with it. The police decided to go on the sly, and asked Jessica to call her former lover and bring him to a frank conversation. Jessica agreed without hesitation. She dialed Bender's number and made a spectacle of herself. She blamed him for what had happened, cried, and kept asking why he'd done it. But Gregory seemed to have figured out what the investigators were up to from the start, and persisted in pretending he didn't understand. When Jessica said that he killed her fiancé, the businessman pretended to be surprised by this news, and after expressed his condolences to the ex-girlfriend, to get Gregory to confess, to make him mad or to force him to commit a blunder, never succeeded. The police had no reason to detain or question the man. He could only be called to testify, but he honored the restraining order and seemed to have let the ex-girlfriend go long ago. The killer's notes while the investigation was treading water, trying to find any clues. The police received a call from Dimora Sanchez Bender, saying that she had important information about the Patrick de la Cerda case. The woman was immediately invited to the station for an interview, where she said that shortly before the crime she saw a strange notebook on her husband's desk in his office. Looking into it, Dimora found a detailed plan of some stranger's house, and next to it, there was a strange algorithm of actions. She hadn't paid any attention to it at the time, but when Dimora saw a news report about the brutal murder of a young man, and the story showed the plan of his house, she immediately remembered the sketches of her unfaithful husband, with whom she was on the verge of divorce, and decided to tell the investigators. This information gave the police enough reason to search the house of the alleged perpetrator. The mysterious notebook, about which the wife of the businessman spoke, was found in the office, but the pages with the plan of the house and other records were removed. However, they were soon found in the office, but in a trash can that Gregory had apparently failed or forgotten to empty. He had simply ripped out the pages, crumpled them up, and tossed them in the trash. Apparently, he was confident that his house would not be searched, since there was no evidence against him. On the sheets of paper, in addition to the layout of the house, there was a detailed plan of the crime itself. It became clear that the criminal had prepared long and thoroughly, working out every point. In particular, it was said about the need to turn off the phone, use gloves and lubricate the soles of shoes with a special compound, so that it did not leave traces on the floor. From the records, it became clear that Gregory followed his victim, knew what time Patrick returned home, and was aware of the presence of surveillance cameras in the house and yard. In addition, Gregory made sure to dispose of the crime weapon, dirty clothes, shoes, and gloves. He was only let down by the fact that his own records had not been destroyed in time, and his wife's curiosity. In addition, a fourth missing shell casing was found on the table, in a cigar box, which the gunman was supposed to have carried off as a trophy. Forensics confirmed that it was the exact same shell casing from the crime scene. The trial and the defense attorney's attempts to shift the blame to Jessica. The evidence was enough to arrest Gregory and initiate a trial. But the main problem was that all the evidence found could be called circumstantial, because the crime weapon was never found. There was no evidence that the accused had ever been to the victim's house, and there were no witnesses. Fender's trial did not begin until May 2021. More than 3 years after his atrocity. During this time, he hired the best lawyers who had time to thoroughly prepare for the case. The businessman was optimistic and seemed to believe that he would get away with it. Jessica was a key witness, She detailed her relationship with Gregory over many years, how she learned he was married and tried to break up with him, as well as the harassment and threats he made against her and Patrick. As evidence, she provided saved screenshots of correspondence as well as phone records. In response, Fender's attorneys attempted to shift all the blame onto Jessica. The defense stated that Jessica herself provoked Gregory with her behavior, because she registered on a dating site and started a new relationship, not yet broken up with Gregory, which hurt his pride and ego. Also, Jessica was accused of mercantilism, noting that she liked to receive expensive gifts from a rich suitor. The main evidence, sheets with records of the murder plan, the lawyers called only a fantasy of a wounded man who wanted to take revenge on his rival. At the same time, the defense insisted that the defendant did not go further than plans and fantasies, so his traces at the scene of the crime were not found. In addition, according to the lawyers, the search in the house of their client was illegal and was conducted with violations, and therefore the second evidence, a shell casing, he could simply plant it in the process. The crime weapon was also not found, and the model of the gun Jessica identified from a picture, saying that she had previously seen it in the collection of her boyfriend, but she could be wrong because she was not well versed in weapons. Ex-wife testimony and final judgment. At one of the sessions, the defendant's now ex-wife, Dimora Sanchez, was called as a witness. The man, who had hitherto looked indifferent, suddenly became animated and unexpectedly confessed his love for her. The ex-wife was moved by this confession and apparently changed her mind about testifying against Gregory. She confused her testimony, citing her forgetfulness, and finally added that she had lived with the man for many years and doubted that he was capable of murder. Despite attempts by defense attorneys to challenge the legality of the search of the defendant's home, despite his ex-wife's unexpected statement, and despite the lack of direct evidence, the jury, after hours of deliberation, still found Gregory Bender guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, barring him from ever being eligible for parole. As the judge read out the sentence, the defendant stared at Jessica intently, seemingly without even blinking. He was literally glaring at her, which made her feel sick and almost had a panic attack. She sat next to her late fiancé's mother, and at one point began sobbing and literally choking. Despite numerous attempts by Bender and his highly paid lawyers to appeal the verdict and get the case reviewed, all of their appeals were rejected. Not the least role in this played a wide resonance of the case in society, because a wealthy millionaire businessman in cold blood massacred a simple working man and tried to get away with it. The story of Patrick Della Carta was widely covered in the press. With Gregory Bender still behind bars at the moment, Jessica Devnani says she feels safe and continues to live for Patrick and keep his memory alive. She wears the ring he gave her as a gift, as well as that exclusive piece of jewelry Patrick never got around to giving her. Jessica maintains a close relationship with her deceased fiancé's parents, who treat her like their own daughter. Envy and insatiable greed, potent and dark emotions often lead individuals down the path of crime. When mixed with unbridled lust and an obsessive need to control others, these feelings can shape a horrifying, lethal intent. It's a chilling concept, and it becomes even more sinister when these emotions fester secretly within a family unit. This narrative unfolds in a Sydney suburb revolving around the Lynn family, a seemingly harmonious and large household. Their story escalated into one of the most infamous and bloody crimes in Australian history. The complexity and duration of the investigation are noteworthy as the perpetrator grew confident in escaping justice. His meticulously crafted and brutally executed plan was nearly flawless. However, a minor overlooked detail eventually led the police to the breakthrough they needed. Let's delve into the beginning of this saga, exploring how a cocktail of greed, envy for others' success, and corrupt passion can drive someone to madness, transforming them into a monstrous figure who didn't even spare children in their rampage. The Lynn family story, a portrait of love, ambition, and tragic end. Min Lin and Yun Lily. Lynn's love story began in the late 1980s during their college years at an Australian university. Both natives of China, they had separately emigrated to pursue higher education. Lily through an exchange program, and Min, who was 2 years her senior, remained in the country for a professional internship after completing his bachelor's degree. Their paths crossed in a university corridor, leading to what they later recalled as love at first sight. Sharing common roots and dreams, both felt like outsiders in a foreign land, but were united by their aspirations to start a new life in Australia. After graduation, the couple married and settled in the picturesque and tranquil suburb of North Epping in Sydney. Their love blossomed into a large, tight-knit family, deeply connected and committed to each other. In August 1994, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named June Brenda Lynn, who mostly went by her middle name, Brenda. Henry, their son, was born in 1997, followed by the youngest, Terry, in 2000. Entering the 2000s, Min and Yoon decided to embark on a business venture, opening a small newsstand. Their dedication transformed this modest start into a thriving news agency with its publishing arm on Rose Street. The Lin family's business flourished, enabling them to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle with a spacious home, a luxury car, and prestigious private schooling for their children. Min focused on business affairs while Yoon dedicated herself to homemaking and nurturing their children. In their community, the Lins were well regarded for their hard work, kindness, and philanthropy. They were known as exemplary, caring parents and never engaged in conflicts. Brenda, their eldest, was a standout beauty and an excellent student with a compassionate heart for animals. The boys, Henry and Terry, were energetic and sports-loving, sharing a passion for soccer. The siblings shared a close bond, almost inseparable from each other. Relocating relatives from China to Australia as the Lin family settled in Australia and their financial prosperity grew, they began inviting relatives from China to visit, live, or even stay permanently. In the early 2000s, Min's parents were the first to move to North Epping, living nearby and helping with the children. Min's father also worked in their newsstand on weekends. A few years later, Yun's parents also moved to Sydney's suburb, with Min and Yoon buying them a small house. Yun's sister, Irene, came to live with the Lins, assisting with household chores and the children. By this time, the Lin family business was generating substantial income, reportedly nearing $1 million annually. Their venture wasn't just a shop or publishing house, it had become a local hub where people gathered to read and discuss news over coffee. Towards the end of 2007, Min Lin's younger sister, Kathy Lin, née Shi, and her husband, Leongbin Robert, Z, also moved to Australia, seeking better opportunities in the bustling city of Sydney. They had visited relatives in Australia before and briefly lived in Melbourne, but returned to China. This time, they were determined to settle in Australia permanently. Robert, a former successful ENT doctor in China, decided to switch careers and try entrepreneurship. He had opened their own restaurant in Sydney, investing all their savings, but the business struggled and soon closed. Subsequent attempts to open a cafe or snack bar also failed. Robert, lacking business acumen and financial management skills, struggled in his new ventures. Eventually, Robert and Kathy moved to North Epping, closer to family. Kathy found work, but Robert remained in a phase of self-discovery, unsure of his future path. The Lin and Z families were bound not only by kinship, but also by strong friendship. They saw each other almost daily, stayed in constant touch, and often gathered for family meals. Their last such gathering was on the evening of Friday, July 17, 2009, at the home of Kathy and Min's parents. Unbeknownst to them, this would be their final reunion. The Lin family home is scene of a gruesome massacre on the morning of July 18th. The Lin family's shop remained unexpectedly closed, surprising their regular customers. The shop, which had operated 7 days a week for years, showed no signs of opening, with no notice or warning on the doors. This unusual occurrence raised concerns among the customers and neighboring shop owners. One of them, after several unsuccessful attempts to reach Min, called his sister Kathy to inquire about the situation. Kathy was both surprised and alarmed, knowing her brother had never closed the shop for a day without prior arrangements, often having their father or father-in-law cover for him. She tried calling Min and then his wife Yoon, but to no avail. Her calls to their home phone also went unanswered. Worried, Kathy and her husband Robert decided to visit Min's house to ensure everything was all right. Arriving around 9 a.m., They noticed the family car in the driveway and found the front door unlocked, but no sign of the homeowners. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, and calls for the family members went unanswered. The house appeared undisturbed with no signs of forced entry. Kathy, calling out for her brother again, ascended to the second floor. Upon opening the bedroom door of Min and Yunlin, she screamed in shock and horror, staggering back at the gruesome scene before her. The room was drenched in blood, covering the floor, walls, ceiling, furniture, and curtains. The lifeless body of 43-year-old Yunlin lay near the bed, mutilated beyond immediate recognition. In the adjacent room, where 39-year-old Irene, Yoon's sister, slept, the scene was equally ghastly. Irene lay dead in her bed, her face a bloody pulp. In the children's bedrooms, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry had also been brutally beaten to death, their bodies lying in different corners of the room. Brenda, the 15-year-old daughter, had fortunately been away on a school trip the previous day, and was not at home during the tragic night. The body of the household's head, Min Lin, was nowhere to be found, leading to a faint hope that he might be alive, possibly injured, taken hostage, or escaped. Kathy immediately called emergency services, but was so hysterical from the shock that she struggled to convey what had happened. She screamed and cried into the phone, begging for medics to arrive quickly and try to save anyone they could. However, the first responders could only confirm the deaths of all the victims at the scene of the massacre. The morning after, a chilling discovery following Kathy's frantic call to emergency services. Robert left to fetch the Lin parents, who lived about 10 kilometers away from the crime scene. The police and paramedics arrived within minutes, and what they encountered was immediately dubbed as one of the most horrific crime scenes they had ever witnessed. Tragically, it was too late for any member of the Lin family. Each had been killed by multiple blows to the head with a heavy blunt object, resembling a hammer. However, the lethal weapon was nowhere to be found, leading investigators to conclude that the perpetrator had taken it with them. Min Lin's body was eventually discovered in his own bedroom, covered with a blood-soaked blanket. Like his family, he had been beaten to death in a similar manner. It appeared that he was the first victim, followed by his wife, her sister, and lastly, the two boys. An initial inspection of the crime scene yielded no significant clues or leads. The absence of the lethal weapon, coupled with the fact that valuables and money were left untouched, indicated that the primary objective was the elimination of the Lin family, rather than robbery. Initially, multiple assailants were suspected, as it seemed unlikely that one person could single-handedly overpower so many. However, evidence suggested that the children were awake, and had desperately tried to escape during the attack, as indicated by bloodstains and splatters throughout the house. Interestingly, all adult victims, besides head injuries, also showed signs of strangulation, possibly to minimize resistance during the assault. Identical bloody shoe prints were found in each room, with a unique tread pattern, but the shoe brand couldn't be identified, only its size. No foreign fingerprints were discovered, suggesting that the killer or killers wore gloves. At first, there were no leads or theories about the identity of the perpetrator, as family, friends, and neighbors unanimously stated that the Lins had no known enemies. The motive for such a brutal massacre of 5 people remained unclear. The time of the attack was established to be between midnight and 3 a.m. on July 18. The heiress and her guardians, Brenda Lin, the eldest and now the sole survivor of the extensive Lin family, was on a school trip to New Caledonia at the time of the tragedy. She first learned of the horrific incident through social media, and initially refused to believe that it involved her own family, hoping for some mistake. Her Aunt Kathy soon called her, confirming the dreadful news through tearful sobs. Brenda was quickly flown back to Sydney, where Kathy and Robert, her new guardians, met her at the airport. Brenda moved in with them as the Lin family home was sealed as a crime scene. The next day, a grief-stricken Brenda was brought to the police station for questioning. However, she could offer no new information, insisting that her family had no enemies or ill-wishers, and had noticed nothing unusual before her trip. Following her family's death, Brenda became the heir to a substantial fortune, including property and the family business. However, being a minor and still in school, her legal guardians, Aunt Kathy and her husband Robert, were responsible for managing the estate. Brenda's grandparents also offered their support, but Kathy and Robert insisted on being her primary caretakers. Robert even threatened legal action if the elderly relatives sought custody, arguing they were too old to care for a teenager. Eventually, the matter was settled amicably, and Brenda remained with her aunt and uncle. The Lynn's shop and publishing business, which had been temporarily closed, soon reopened under the management of the Z's, as Brenda was yet to take over the business operations. Robert also began actively reviewing the family's bank accounts, savings, real estate, and other assets. Investigation and experts repeatedly scrutinized the crime scene, meticulously documenting every detail. Despite their efforts, no concrete leads emerged. They deduced that the killer likely acted alone and entered the house quietly, suggesting either an unlocked door or the perpetrator having a key. The killer wore size 9.5 shoes with a distinct, ornate tread pattern. The lethal weapon, believed to be a hammer, was never found in or around the house. The killer's use of gloves meant no fingerprints were left behind, and no foreign DNA was found, only traces from the 5 victims. A peculiar and significant detail was that bloodstains were found on the doorknobs of each bedroom where the perpetrators occurred, indicating the killer's bloody gloves touched them. However, there were no bloodstains on the doorknob of Brenda's room, suggesting the killer knew she was not there. As one of Australia's most high-profile cases, the tragic incident was widely covered in the media. With no substantial evidence or suspects, various improbable theories emerged. Rumors circulated about the Lynn's alleged vast fortune, leading to their demise. There were theories of a robbery gone wrong, and even involvement of local Chinese mafia clans. Such theories weren't entirely dismissed, given the area's history with a burglary gang. The Lynn shop had been attacked months before the tragedy, and men had witnessed an armored car robbery a week before the fatal incidents. Although the criminals wore masks and men couldn't identify them, it was speculated he might have been eliminated as a potential witness. Months passed with the investigation at a standstill. None of the theories were substantiated, and no suspects emerged. The robbery theory was eventually ruled out as money and valuables were untouched, and the killer seemed to have a singular purpose: to eliminate the household members. Additionally, the power was cut off in the house on the night of the fatal incidents, indicating the killer knew where the electrical panel was. The assailants' familiarity with the house in total darkness suggested they had been there before and knew the layout, possibly even obtaining a key in advance. A crucial overlooked clue while reviewing the perplexing case details for the 100th time. An investigator repeatedly listened to Kathy's emergency call, searching for any overlooked clue. Surprisingly, a significant hint was found in that recording. The recording captured Kathy's hysterical attempts to explain the situation, her words jumbled and interrupted by cries and sobs. At the end of the call, when the operator confirmed that emergency services were en route, Kathy unexpectedly mentioned her husband's name, adding something in Cantonese, addressing him directly. This detail piqued the investigators' interest, prompting them to translate her words. It turned out Kathy was pleading with her husband not to leave her alone in the house. This was significant because Robert had decided to fetch the Lynn parents on his own, leaving Kathy at the grisly crime scene before the police arrived. Robert's behavior seemed highly suspicious. 5 people had just been brutally taken away in the house, and the killer could still have been hiding inside, making Kathy a potential target. Yet, Robert appeared calm and simply left, as if he knew nothing bad would happen to his wife. The main suspect and new evidence after several unproductive months, the police finally identified a primary and sole suspect, Robert Tsai. It was discovered that he had a key to his brother-in-law's house, which Min had given him just in case, shortly before the tragedy. Curiously, Robert never mentioned this during interrogations, and Kathy was unaware that her brother had given her husband a key. Brenda unknowingly revealed this crucial detail to the investigators. Further investigation revealed that Robert's claim of being a successful ENT doctor was a facade. While he did possess a medical degree, he never held a stable job in the field. Rumors suggested he fled to Australia to avoid punishment for alleged bribery charges in China. In Australia, Robert failed to establish himself professionally, squandering the last of his savings on unsuccessful business ventures. After moving to North Epping, he became essentially idle, relying on his wife's income and occasional financial assistance from Kathy's relatives. Once the guardianship papers for Brenda were finalized, Robert acted as if he had inherited the Lynn family's estate. His first move was to force Yun's parents out of the house that Min had bought for them, though it was legally under the deceased's name. Min and Kathy's parents remained in the house bought for them. Considering these facts and circumstances, investigators theorized that Robert was driven by intense envy of his wife's more successful and wealthy relatives, harboring a long-standing plan to seize their property, money, and lucrative business. Despite living under the same roof as the perpetrator of the crime against her family, Brenda and Kathy weren't considered in immediate danger. Brenda was oblivious to the true nature of her cohabitant, while Kathy was needed by Robert to maintain control over the family's assets. However, the police couldn't arrest Robert yet due to lack of concrete evidence against him. Interrogation, surveillance, and arrest. The investigation team obtained permission to install several hidden cameras in the Z household, hoping to gather the evidence needed to prove Robert's guilt. The breakthrough came sooner than expected, starting with an unsuspecting revelation by Kathy during an interrogation. Kathy mentioned her husband's preference for a particular brand of shoes. A few years back, Robert had purchased 2 pairs of sneakers from a limited edition series that he particularly liked. He had worn out and discarded one pair, but the other was still carefully stored in its box at their home. Notably, Robert wore size 9.5 shoes, the same size as the killer's. The key evidence came when Robert was captured on one of the hidden cameras, meticulously destroying the box of the aforementioned shoes. This footage led to a warrant to search the suspect's home, where a new pair of size 9.5 sneakers was found. The tread pattern on these shoes matched the prints found at the crime scene. Additionally, a small smeared trace resembling blood was discovered in his garage. Forensic analysis confirmed that it was indeed a bloodstain containing the DNA of all 5 Lynn family victims, literally linking it to the crime scene. This evidence led to Robert's arrest, finally providing the concrete proof the police needed to take action. Arrest, trial, and shocking revelations. In May 2011, 2 years after the tragic incidents, evidence led to Robert Z's arrest. He vehemently denied any involvement, claiming the blood found in his garage appeared after their return from the Lynn house. He also dismissed the significance of the sneakers with matching tread patterns found in his possession, asserting they were brand new and that he had immediately disposed of the old pair. While awaiting trial in prison for 3 years, Robert unknowingly shared cells with several informants. In one such conversation, he confessed to meticulously planning the crime and carefully covering his tracks. He mentioned buying the lethal weapon in a remote store without surveillance cameras and drugging his wife with sedatives and tea to prevent her from waking up and noticing his absence. He disposed of the hammer, sneakers, gloves, and clothing in a manner that ensured they would never be found. At the trial, Robert denied everything, and the only evidence against him were the statements from his cellmates and the previously mentioned indirect evidence. As a result, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, and Robert was released on bail in December 2015. The trial resumed in June 2016 with testimony from another informant, who claimed Robert confessed to an obsession with since she was 13. This led to a re-examination of Brenda, who tearfully admitted that Robert had coerced her into a sexual relationship shortly after she started living with them. Fearing retaliation, she had remained silent about the abuse for years. With these revelations and considering other evidence, Robert Z was found guilty on all charges. He received 5 life sentences, 1 for each fatal crime, without the possibility of parole. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. The case of Nobuyuki Sato, a schoolgirl in the house as a pet. To realize that the perpetrator is a maniac is possible by the nature of his actions. As a rule, maniacs abuse, torture, and then brutally take the lives of their victims, but sometimes such abuse lasts for years or even decades. If the account of a maniac has more than 2 victims, criminalists call it a series, and the criminal himself a serial maniac. The history of world criminalistics knows a lot of cases when maniacs did not kill their victims, but held them captive in their own homes, basements, or specially created bunkers. It is enough to remember Natasha Kampusch or Elizabeth Fritzl, who was kept by her own father in the basement of their own house for 24 years. Alas, there are many such stories, and what is most curious is that in most cases the hostages were, one might say, in full view of everyone, and the kidnappers had previously come to the attention of the police. The name of our heroine today is Fusako Sano, and she has been held captive for almost 10 years in a room whose door was never locked. One might assume that it was her story that inspired Natasha Kampusch's kidnapper. But by the time the Japanese girl's tragedy became public, the Austrian schoolgirl Natasha had already been living in captivity for a second year. But let's break down this tangled case full of drama known as the Niigata girl captivity incident from the start. Victim, Fusako Sano. A girl named Fusako Sano, later changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, was born in the small Japanese town of Mitsuki, located in Niigata Prefecture in 1980, on November 28. She grew up in an ordinary family of average income, was a welcome and favorite child. The girl attended one of the local schools, was fond of baseball, and cheered for the local team. On November 13, 1990, 2 weeks before her 10th birthday, Fusako, who was in the 4th grade at the time, was coming home from school. She was a little late because she had stayed to watch the school baseball game. Her parents were aware of the sporting event, so they were not particularly concerned. When the schoolgirl walked home on her usual route, it was already getting dark. On a cold autumn evening, there were almost no passers-by on the street, and rare cars were passing quickly, disappearing from sight. Suddenly, one car overtook the girl and then braked sharply and swerved in front of her. The loud squeal of brakes divided young Sano's life into before and after. Kidnapper Nobuyuki Sato was born in 1962, July 15th, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata, in a wealthy family. The head of the family had its own successful business related to passenger transportation. The boy was a late child of his parents, and at the time of his birth, his father was 62 years old, and his mother was 37 years old. Nobuyuki had 5 siblings from his father's previous marriage, but he had no ties to them. The boy grew up a capricious and very spoiled child, for whom there were no inhibitions. At the same time, he was very emotional and sometimes even aggressive. If his demands were not met immediately, he could throw a tantrum, and once he threw himself at his mother with fists right in the store when she did not buy him another toy. At school, Nobuyuki had almost no friends because of his complex character, strange and sometimes inadequate behavior. It is worth noting that the boy was quite tall, which he was very embarrassed of, and all the time slouched a lot, so he received a lot of offensive nicknames. On one of the central streets of the city, the head of the family built a luxurious 2-story house in European style, where on the 2nd floor most of the part was occupied by a spacious and bright children's room for his favorite son. However, the boy did not like the room. He behaved restlessly, and kept repeating that he was afraid to be there alone. Such anxious behavior and unreasonable fears became the reason to show the child to a doctor. After an initial medical examination at a regular hospital, the boy was referred to a psychiatrist for evaluation. There he was diagnosed with several disorders, including nyctophobia, fear of the dark, mysophobia, fear of germs and dirt. In addition, the boy was found to have a strange combination of autophobia, fear of loneliness, and sociophobia, anxiety disorder related to social interaction. That is, he was equally afraid of and avoided both loneliness and contact with others. Nobuyuki always remained a loner. He had neither a girlfriend, despite his rather attractive appearance, nor friends. In high school he actually became an outcast, and peers simply did not want to communicate with him. He could vent his anger, dissatisfaction with himself and others only on his own elderly parents, who forgave him everything and tried in every possible way to placate his son with gifts or money. As an adult, Sato did not stay at any job. He constantly got into trouble, conflicted with colleagues, and neglected his direct duties, because of which no one wanted to do business with him. The young man could go home in the middle of the workday just because it rained, and he felt sad about it. And once he intentionally injured a female coworker, he probably felt some kind of sympathy for her and was trying to get her attention. The incident was written off as an accident, but Sato was immediately fired. After that, he did not work anywhere else and lived on his parents' money. Gradually, the young man began to leave his room less and less often, and more often conflicts with his parents. After another such quarrel, the young man set a fire in his own home, which almost destroyed the entire house and its inhabitants. Then Sato was sent for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic, where he was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, outbursts of uncontrolled aggression, as well as signs of misogyny, acute dislike and hatred of female representatives of the female sex. He stayed in the hospital for a little over a month, after which he was discharged, having been deemed to pose no threat to others. For a while, Nobuyuki was relatively calm, and even started to rebuild the partially burned house and added a couple more rooms to it. But his efforts did not last long, and he simply abandoned the construction. The first attempted kidnapping and arrest Sato became increasingly unsociable, sullen, and spent most of his time in his room watching TV. It should be noted that over time he stopped letting his mother and father not only into his room, but also, in principle, to the second floor. In case of violation of this boundary, he would pounce on his elderly parents with fists, shouting and threatening them with death. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began to go for walks, but he preferred to walk near one of the local schools, where he closely watched the girls. At first he behaved with restraint, did not approach and did not try to make contact with anyone, but one day he grabbed one of the girls right at the school gate, threw her over his shoulder and ran to his car, which he parked nearby. All this happened in front of the other children, who immediately shouted and called for help. A school security guard and a few bystanders reacted quickly and rescued the girl and detained the kidnapper before the police arrived. The girl Sato tried to kidnap was barely 9 years old. He could not explain why he had attacked the schoolgirl, so the only logical conclusion was that Sato was charged with attempting to commit unlawful acts of violence against a minor. He faced a serious prison sentence, but at his trial, which took place in August of the same year, Nobuyuki was given only a year's probation. According to some reports, his father helped him to do this by using his connections and paying a lot of money. Moreover, soon Nobuyuki's name mysteriously disappeared from the database of criminals who were prosecuted. Here, apparently, also did not do without the efforts of his father, except that the elderly man, so zealously trying to clean up the reputation of the heir, himself went to the hospital with a heart attack and died. Sato Sr. felt an acute sense of shame and pain for the monster he had raised. The kidnapping of a girl in Niigata a year and a half after the first failed kidnapping attempt, the 28-year-old went on the hunt again. All this time, he behaved relatively calmly, did not get in the sight of the police, and the incident that occurred in the spring of 1989 near the school, safely all forgotten. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki left home, got into a car, and for several hours just drove around the city. In the evening, when it was starting to get dark, he drove to a deserted road, where he soon saw a girl coming home from school. It was 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had, to her misfortune, been delayed at a sporting event that day. There were no people or other cars nearby, no one to call for help or police. Sato braked sharply and swerved to the curb, right in front of the girl. He got out of the car, knife in hand, grabbed Fusako and threatened if she tried to scream or run away, he would slit her throat. He then shoved Fusako Sano into the trunk, and after driving down the road some more, he turned onto a vacant lot. There, Nobuyuki opened the trunk again, tied the girl's hands and feet, taped her mouth shut. When it got dark, the kidnapper drove to his house, took the captive out of the trunk, and carried her to his room, entering through an unfinished part of the dwelling to remain undetected. Then he also went back out, and entered already through the door, as he always did. Nobuyuki went upstairs, and again, threatening her with the knife, ordered Fusako to be quiet. He then tied her to the bed and told her that if she tried to leave the room or even look out the window, scream or cry, he would kill her and throw her body into the ocean so that no one would ever find it. The schoolgirl was scared to death and did everything the kidnapper said, still hoping that he would take pity and let her go. The search for the missing girl. When Fusako didn't come home from school, her parents began to worry. They knew her daughter would stay late after school to watch a baseball game, but it was getting dark outside and she should have been home a long time ago. At first, the Sano couple tried to find their daughter on their own, following her usual route from home to school, but their efforts were unsuccessful. closer to night, the parents of the schoolgirl appealed to the police, hoping that the girl will be found quickly, because from the moment of her disappearance has passed only a few hours. Police squads began the search, and by morning they were joined by dozens of volunteers from among local residents. The next day, more than 200 people took part in the search operation, combing the area, pasting flyers with photos of the missing girl, and interviewing passersby in search of random witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived very close to the girls' school and near the police station. Moreover, he had previously come to the attention of the police for attempting to kidnap the girl. But despite all this, Nobuyuki was not even a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father, who made sure that his son's name did not appear in the criminal database. The massive search lasted for many months, checking numerous empty buildings, structures, trailers, and railroad cars, searching suspicious vehicles, combing vacant lots and interstate highways. But despite all the efforts, no traces or clues to the schoolgirl's whereabouts were found. The most different, even unlikely versions were being worked out, among which there was a suggestion that representatives of North Korean special services were involved in the abduction of the Japanese girl. However, as time went on, the search was not successful, and Fusako Sano was still considered missing, captured by a maniac. As Fusako herself later admitted, she was scared to death at first and did everything her captor told her, hoping that in time he would take pity on her and let her go. But Nobuyuki didn't even think of letting his captive go. For the first few months, he bound her hands and feet tightly, so tightly that the blood flow was impaired, causing her to lose some sensation in her limbs. In case of the slightest disobedience or violation of silence, the torturer used a stun gun as punishment, beat Fusako on the head and body with his fists, or threatened her with a knife. At the same time, Nobuyuki never once took advantage of his victim in an intimate way during his imprisonment. He was not attracted to her as a woman, but rather something between a living toy and a pet to talk to. Nobuyuki Sato fed the prisoner once or twice a day with food prepared by his mother, who lived on the first floor. Because of this meager diet, the girl was weakened and severely malnourished. He forbade her to get out of bed, and she had to go to the bathroom in plastic bags, which the man then took to the unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he bathed Fusako in a basin, cut her hair and nails himself, and dressed her in his own shabby clothes. But even if she behaved quietly and did not break the kidnapper's rules, he still beat her regularly for fun, and practiced various fighting techniques on her. After a few years, Fusako was finally broken psychologically, complied with all the demands of her tormentor, and did not even try to run or look out the window. Sato stopped tying her up when he went somewhere else and didn't even lock the door of his room. He simply made the bed with the prisoner lying there and threw a couple of blankets or towels on top, so that at first glance it looked like there was nothing underneath. As time went on, Nobuyuki began to turn on Fusako's radio periodically and allowed her to watch television with him. However, they watched only scotchki or some sports matches, something that was interesting to Nobuyuki himself. He also brought her comic books, which he adored. It was the only thing Fusako had read in her years of confinement. For almost 10 years, she had seen no other people but her captor, had never spoken to anyone, and had never left the confines of her room. In fact, she was on the bed all the time and hardly moved at all. The girl was so resigned to her fate that she did not even try to resist, escape, or make herself known. Mother abuse and police indifference. Nobuyuki's mother lived on the first floor of the house and for years had not entered her son's room because he threatened to beat her if she broke the ban. The woman knew her spoiled and violent son all too well, so she followed his rules. After Nobuyuki put a prisoner in the room, he forbade the mother to even go up to the second floor, and when she once tried to do so, he simply pushed the elderly mother down the stairs. She worked as much as she could and tried to stay home as little as possible. But when she retired in 1996, at the age of 73, her life became simply unbearable. Her son regularly abused his mother, beat her, and forced her to follow a series of rules he had invented. Finally, the elderly woman could not stand it, and in the spring of 1996 went to the police, where she wrote a statement that she was a victim of domestic violence by her own son. But the police, apparently, did not want to deal with the case, and therefore persuaded Mrs. Sato to withdraw her statement and independently deal with the family problems. The pensioner also twice applied for consultation to the public health center, where she complained about her son's inadequate and aggressive behavior and asked to hospitalize him in a psychiatric hospital. But even here she was refused, considering such a reason not serious enough, and advising her to persuade her son to go to the clinic for help himself. Almost 4 years later, in January 2000, the exhausted elderly woman, after another beating, called the hospital and asked for a medical team to be sent to her house as well as representatives of law enforcement, because her son was holding her tied up and had tasered her several times. An unexpected discovery. This time, the officials finally responded to the pensioner's complaints and went to the address. When the ambulance and police car arrived at the house, Nobuyuki became visibly nervous. He began to behave aggressively, resisted, and tried to fight. Because of this inappropriate behavior, he had to be handcuffed, and the medics injected him with a large dose of sedatives. The beaten elderly woman admitted that she was afraid of her son, whose behavior was becoming more and more aggressive and uncontrollable. She also said that she had not gone up to the second floor of the house for many years because the air forbade her to do so, threatening to kill her. The police officers decided to check the second floor and Nobuyuki's room. As soon as they entered, they noticed a pile of blankets lying on the bed, which suddenly moved slightly. Pulling back the blankets, the police officers were dumbfounded to see a very thin, pale, and exhausted girl underneath them. When they asked her who she was and how she came to be here, she very quietly gave her name and said that she had been kidnapped on her way home from school a long time ago. After the gruesome discovery, Nobuyuki's mother was brought into the room and asked her if she knew the girl. But the woman was very surprised and claimed that she had no idea that anyone other than her and her son lived in their house. The captive also confirmed that she had never seen the woman before. Confessions of a maniac. The same day Nobuyuki was brought to the station for questioning, and what he told literally shocked the police officers. He remembered in detail the day he was driving along the road and saw Fusako. According to the detainee, he thought the girl was very cute and wanted to take her home with him. Sato claimed that he took care of her. He fed her, washed her, dressed her, and read her comic books, and punished her only for disobedience. He also admitted that he loved his captive as a friend, and she seemed to love him too. He had no intention of ever letting her go and hoped she would stay with him for life. He loved spending time with her. He could talk to the girl for hours about skaks, soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. He added that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which he concluded meant she liked living with him. Consequences, trial and sentence. After a medical examination, the doctors concluded that, despite his mental disorder, Sato was able to recognize his actions and could therefore stand trial. His mother could be involved as an accomplice because the elderly woman, at the request of her son, regularly bought feminine hygiene products in the supermarket and could suspect something wrong. But it was taken into account the fact that she repeatedly contacted the police and medical institutions, but her requests to visit the family home were ignored. The case was widely publicized even before the trial began, and the city police were strongly criticized because Nobuyuki had been previously prosecuted for attempted kidnapping of a schoolgirl. But when he brought his plan to the end, he remained above suspicion. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department, who failed to control the situation from the beginning and made a lot of mistakes, were removed from their posts. Nobuyuki Sato was brought to trial in May 2000. All his actions and even the smallest offenses were studied in detail and attached to the case because the prosecutors tried to achieve for the kidnapper of the maximum possible punishment. As a result, Sato was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Such a term was considered the maximum. He was released in the spring of 2015. By that time, his mother had long died in a home for the elderly, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He himself was found dead a year and a half later in early 2017, in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. How did the girl's life turn out? At the time of her discovery, Fusako was so weak that she could barely stand on her feet. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion and dehydration, and her muscles were practically atrophied. In addition to stuttering, frightened of sunlight, and practically lost her communication skills. When her parents saw their daughter for the first time after nearly a decade apart, they didn't even recognize her. It took the girl about a year to more or less recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to recover. Chisako Sano had severe post-traumatic stress disorder, shunned people, and her intelligence remained at the level of a 9-10-year-old child. Her parents took their daughter out of town. She changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, and flatly refused to talk to the press. Over time, she made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. Unfortunately, in 2007, she suffered another shock when her father drowned in front of her eyes during a family trip to a pond. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about, or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.